talked with Miss Jamie today, and she said all of your pets have made an appearance in your book readings except Memphis. So we have been trying for the last 20 minutes to get him to lay down somewhere so I could read by him. He won't. He just wants to stand here and get loved. So I have no idea how this is going to go, but we're going to give it a shot. This is Memphis. Say hi. Say hi to kids. Look at the kids. Say hey kids. Hey kids. Sweet boy. All right, we are going to read a book that I have read to you before, but that's okay because I always tell you that a book is a treasure that you get to open again and again and again. This is my favorite Patricia Polacco book, and I have just something really cool to share with you after we read it. But The Keeping Quilt by Patricia Polacco, also illustrated by her. The wonderful thing about the story, the reason I love it so much, is I went to a conference many, many years ago when I was just a very fresh teacher before I even had children of my own. And I got to see Patricia Polacco read this book in person. And after she had read the book, she pulled out the quilt that she had written about. I was so amazed that I started to cry. So I love this book. I have so many connections with it, but I'll tell you that after we read The Keeping Quilt. When my great-grandma Anna came to America, she wore the same thick overcoat and big boots she had worn for farm work. But her family weren't dirt farmers anymore. In New York City, her father's work was hauling things on a wagon, and the rest of the family made artificial flowers all day. Everyone was in a hurry, and it was so crowded. Not like in back home Russia, but all the same, it was their home, and most of their neighbors were just like them. We can see that Patricia really wants this character to stand out because she makes this character in color. When Anna went to school, English sounded to her like pebbles dropping into shallow water. Did you hear that simile? That simile compared English and pebbles dropping into shallow water. Shh, shh, shh. In 6 months, she was speaking English. Her parents almost never learned, so she spoke English for them too. The only things she had left of back home Russia were her dress and the babushka she liked to throw up into the air when she was dancing. We saw that babushka here and over on the first page. So it would seem that a babushka may be a headscarf. And her dress was getting too small. After her mother had sewn her a new one, she took her old dress and babushka. Then from a basket of old clothes, she took Uncle Vladimir's shirt, Aunt Havela's nightdress, and an apron of Aunt Natasha's. We will make a quilt to help us always remember home, Anna's mother said. It will be like having the family in back home Russia dance around us at night. That's another beautiful simile. Having the quilt will be like the family dancing around us. And so it was. Anna's mother invited all the neighborhood ladies. They cut out animals and flowers from the scraps of clothing. Anna kept the needles threaded and handed them to the ladies as they needed them. The border of the quilt was made of Anna's babushka. When I was a little girl, my granny worked at a senior citizens home. And since she kept me during the day, when my dad worked, I would go with her to the senior citizen center. And in the senior citizen center was a room exactly like this. There was a huge quilt frame in the middle of the room, and she would let me sit around, hey, Memphis. She would let me sit around the table and thread the needles for the ladies as they made the quilts. On Friday nights, Anna's mother would say the prayers that started the Sabbath. The family ate challah and chicken soup. The quilt was the tablecloth. I don't know if you can see it since Memphis is in the way over there. Anna grew up and fell in love with great-grandpa Sasha. To show he wanted to be her husband, he gave Anna a gold coin, a dried flower, and a piece of rock salt, all tied into a linen handkerchief. The gold was for wealth, the flower was for love, and the salt so that their lives would have flavor. She accepted the hanky. They were engaged. I think they're sitting on a quilt like a picnic blanket. Under the wedding huppah, which if you notice is the quilt, Anna and Sasha promised each other love and understanding. After the wedding, the men and women celebrated separately. That's a little different than our culture, isn't it? In our culture, everyone celebrates together at a wedding reception. But in Anna's culture, they celebrated separately. When my grandma Carl was born, Anna wrapped her daughter in the quilt to welcome her warmly into the world. Carl was given a gift of gold, flour, salt, and bread. Gold, so that she would never know poverty. A flower, so she would always know love. Salt, so that her life would always have flavor. And bread, so that she would never know hunger. Carl learned to keep the Sabbath and to cook and clean and do washing. Married you'll be someday, Anna told Carl. And again, the quilt became a wedding huppah. This time for Carl's wedding to Grandpa George. Men and women celebrated together, but they still did not dance together. So see, traditions are changing a little bit. In Carl's wedding bouquet was a gold coin, bread, and salt. Carl and George moved to a farm in Michigan, and great-grandma Anna came to live with them. The quilt, once again, wrapped a new little girl, Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen called Anna Lady Grandma. She'd grown very old and was sick a lot of the time. The quilt kept her legs warm. On Anna's 98th birthday, the cake was a Coolidge, a rich cake with raisins and candied fruit in it. Sounds a lot like a fruit cake. Have you ever had a fruit cake at Christmas? My granny loved fruit cake. When great-grandma Anna died, prayers were said to lift her soul to heaven. My mother, Mary Ellen, was now grown up. When Mary Ellen left home, she took the quilt with her. When she became a bride, the quilt became her huppah. For the first time, friends who were not Jews came to the wedding. My mother wore a suit, but in her bouquet were gold, bread, and salt. So we see some things changing, but some things staying the same. It's important to keep family traditions and honor the changes that come with time. The quilt welcomed me, Patricia, into the world, and it was the tablecloth for my first birthday party. At night, I would trace my fingers around the edges of each animal on the quilt before I went to sleep. I told my mother stories about the animals on the quilt. She told me whose sleeve has made the horse, whose apron had made the chicken, whose dress had made the flowers, and whose babushka went around the edge of the quilt. The quilt was a pretend cape when I was in the bull ring, or sometimes a tent in this steaming Amazon jungle. I hope you're doing this at home during your homeschool time. I hope that you're building forts and using your imagination. If you do, tell me about it. At my wedding to Enzo Mario, men and women danced together. In my bouquet were gold, bread, and salt, and a sprinkle of wine, so that I would always know laughter. 20 years ago, I held Tracy Denise in the quilt for the first time. Someday, she too will leave home, and she will take the quilt with her. Since this book has been written, Tracy Denise has grown up and has had her own children. I love this story because it does remind me of my grandmother. And here is what I wanted to share with you. This quilt that I'm wrapped up in, my granny made for me in that senior citizens home that she would take me to and I would play out while my dad worked. She quilted this, every little square and every little patch, and she gave it to me for my 15th birthday. And this quilt has been with me ever since. And I've laid it on the ground for my children to have picnics on, and I've wrapped up in it while we watched movies. It's precious, precious memories that I have of her and of my family. What precious memories do you have? I hope you'll tell me about some of them. We'll see you tomorrow.